Thank you very much, and thank you so much for the invitation today. It's a pleasure to be here to speak with you, and also to be included with folks like David Wiley and David Porter. Now, when I talk about open as everyone's business, one of the key things around this is realizing that this is not just something for librarians. It's not just something for learning designers. It is, in fact, something that permeates the entire institution. One of the reasons why I start this off with my picture of the Canadian geese is that I'm not entirely sure if everyone knows this, but when Canadian geese are moving in a particular direction, there will be a leader to start off with. And what the leader does is that their shape in the air aerodynamically makes it easier for everybody else who is following them. However, that's incredibly tiring work. And so while they're migrating, what will happen is that one of the geese will be the leader for a while, but eventually they get tired. And so they fall back and another goose comes up and acts as the leader and puts in the hard work and smooths everything out for everyone behind them. And during the course of this journey, every single member of the flock is a leader at some point. And I see open working in very similar manners. So we look for ways to encourage people to take leadership in open educational practices, and we also look for ways to lift others up. Now, I really quite enjoyed the talks that came before me because they have set up a lot of the examples that I'm going to be talking about today perfectly. And we're going to, so thank you very much to both Davids. Your checks are in the mail. So from here, by means of introducing myself, now I am the manager, open educational practice at the University of Southern Queensland. I'm also a PhD candidate in my last year, hoping to submit at the end of this year. And my topic that I look at is the barriers and enablers to ecologies of open practice in Australian higher education. And so this is a topic which is very near and dear to myself. I also have a really big interest in the role of educational policy and the role of the university in a democratic nation. So all of these align very well with this notion of open practices. So today, in the time that's been allotted to me, I'm going to give a brief overview of the Australian higher education and open education landscape. I'll give most of the time to notes from the field, so what I call beacons of practice. There is also a talk about potential and possibility, and I will let you know that Japanese theatre, Roman emperors, and Chinese generals may also be discussed in the course of today. So the first thing, David spoke earlier about the definition for openness, and whilst we all had a chance to read that, the reason why I've got this in my presentation is that the point is that open is never a neutral activity, because at its fundamental core, openness questions ownership, it questions voice, and it also remains a very contested and evolving space. So I want you to think about that whilst I'm speaking this morning, about it not being a neutral activity. And it is very much about taking an ideological and a practice-based stance. And this is nothing new. This is certainly nothing new. When you think about enclosure and copyright, these are relatively new terms. One of the things that I really like to point to is back in the days of the Roman Empire, so when the Library of Alexandria was in operation, Pliny the Elder passed a decree that all ships coming into the port of Alexandria would be required to hand over all of their written materials, and copies would be taken of those and added to the library, the storehouse of human knowledge. This idea that any information could be copied freely and could then be stored and made accessible to people. This is not a new idea. And in fact, open education is often returning to concepts of shared ownership and shared value. One point that I'll leave here for my librarian colleagues is that the back doors of the Library of Alexandria actually opened onto the docks. And so when new ships docked there, hordes of catalogers would descend upon the ships. And if you want a thought of true horror, imagine being the captain of one of those ships and being accosted by a large group of catalogers. I thought my librarian colleagues would appreciate that. But in terms of Australia, what is the university here for? And I come back to Dawkins and the Dawkins reforms of 1988 because it has some of the most evocative language around why we're here. The 2 points in that higher education policy statement that I think resonate the strongest with me is this idea that the university is a place for ideas that are often at odds with majority attitudes. And in doing so, we support the development of a more just and tolerant society. The things that a student engages with across the course of their learning at a university shapes them as a future member of society. My question is, what are we exposing them to? And how can we take on this societal role in order to have citizens who are more informed, who are able to participate in democratic institutions, and who are normalizing a lot of these ideas about knowledge sharing and about things for a societal good. What I then went to is the legislation. Now, in Australia, of course, every single university was set up by an Act of Parliament. And of course, the University of Technology, Sydney, is no different. In fact, I pulled out a couple of things in here in your Act, which I think align very perfectly with open education. So you'll see here under 6B that one of the functions of the university is the provision of courses of study for part-time and evening students in all fields of study. So we're talking about flexibility here, flexibility of learning, the dissemination and increase of knowledge and the promotion of scholarship through continuing education, pure and applied research and development. So this idea that the work that you are doing in teaching and learning and in research is there for the enrichment of society. And in discharging the functions, the university shall place particular emphasis on teaching for professions and for the technologies. So there is definitely a notion of the application of learning and teaching. They shall have regard for making provisions for the educationally disadvantaged students. Now, my argument is with open education is that we can often come at it from a point of saying, well, there are people who don't have access. There are people who can't afford. And we talk about this very much as almost fixing a problem or a solution for a problem. What we have found, however, is that when you implement open educational resources and open educational practice, it actually lifts everybody. Now, you'll find that the benefits certainly tend to accrue more strongly around students who are from, say, for example, low socioeconomic backgrounds. They will benefit more, but essentially you're not doing it just for them, you're doing it for all students. And that more about flexibility here, that you shall endeavour to ensure that students can attend courses provided by the university at times which are more suitable for them to be engaging in work as well. And increasingly, I think that even though that's somewhat outdated, that point D, we are seeing in Australia, of course, that most students are working at least 20 hours per week. They are engaged in work, and so they are looking for flexible options. And this is why we're seeing online and flexible learning being very much taken up by students. However, if we then look at what's happening with students at the moment, this is from a report, Starved of Opportunity, that came out in December of 2019. And I have a horrible suspicion that if we were to do this for December 2020, the figures would not have improved. Take a look at some of these here. These are from students around what their experience is like, especially those who are living on youth allowance and also New Start. Skipping meals, negative effects to mental health, withdrawing from university due to cost, housing insecurity and homelessness. These are things that our students, over half of our students, are experiencing if we take this data. If we then take a look at some of the comments from students in this, I'm going to give you a moment just to read these two here and ask whether or not, is this the educational experience that we want for our students? It's pretty sobering stuff. And I actually use this during our staff induction when we're talking to people about all the good that learning and teaching can do, but then knowing our students. Okay, so when we then look at open educational resources by themselves, providing access to the content alone doesn't actually mean that learning is happening. And this is why I tend to talk about open educational practices, which are about how we get a university to the point where open practice is normalized, supported, celebrated, and rewarded. We're talking about practices here, not just where are we going to put our open content. If we look at Australia overall, one of the best ways of describing it would actually be disconnected silos of good practice. There's a lot going on. However, we generally have a low level of awareness of what is going on across the sector at a national level. We also have a complete lack of policy in the area, and by complete lack of policy, I'm talking about our federal government. Open education aligns very strongly with most points of our educational policy. And as someone from a regional university, we looked with great interest at the Rural and Regional Education Plan that was released by the federal government in 2019. That has got some magnificent targets in there, but no mention of the possibility of open education. And so this falls back to awareness. There are limited ways for us to share practice, and so I really commend UTS for having an event like this, and I would encourage you to continue to do so. Continue to celebrate good practice, continue to share it, and share it outside your institution as well. And also, there tends to be a preoccupation with platforms and repositories. And I've said this to colleagues before when they say, oh, but we'll need to build a repository. We know from 15 years worth of investigation into the barriers in open educational resources that locating them is difficult because there is no single repository. It is disaggregated. You may use things like the Mason Open Meta Finder, which is a brilliant tool. It crawls across a whole range of platforms. But the problem is we've got all these repositories that crop up. And because of this, things are hard to find. Because things are hard to find, we find that awareness is low. Because awareness is low, people don't adopt. However, when I hear people talk about what they're going to do around open projects at their university, one of the first points of discussion is we should build a repository. So if you're doing that, you're actually exacerbating the problem. And my argument is go to where the content already is. My encouragement here at USQ is for staff to add things to the OER Commons and tag it with USQ. And then that way we are going to where practitioners are looking for the information instead of expecting practitioners to come to us. So there's a couple of considerations for you. Now, the other thing as well is maturity of practices. I use the capability maturity model for a lot of my thinking in this area. And I think that this does describe the Australian experience. If you look at a lot of institutions, the reason why open education is succeeding is through the heroic efforts of a dedicated team, rather than there being repeatable methods and rather than there being mature processes. So again, the encouragement would be, don't hang everything off of one person. Don't hang everything off of one team. I recently did some interviews with leaders in Australian higher education institutions around their experiences of running open educational practice projects. An awful lot of them said things were going really, really well, and then this individual left. And when they left, there wasn't really any great catalyst, or there was no sustainability. And so all of our efforts fell in a heap. That's happening consistently across universities. I would argue not just with open, but it is something to consider. This is why open is everyone's business. So what we need to do is have some examples of how this happens, and also to value what people are doing in open, no matter what they are doing. Now, there is a story which is told of a retired Japanese swordsman whose name was Hakuin, and his students were having an argument one day. And they were arguing over which martial art was the strongest and most powerful. So which one was the best one to do? And Hakuin retreated for a day in order to reflect on this because his students asked him for an answer. And when he emerged from his contemplations in the evening, he said to all of his students, there are many ways to the top of a heavily wooded mountain, but the view from the top is the same. So in other words, it doesn't matter how you get there. The fact that you are on that journey and the fact that you are aiming for a particular outcome, the view from the top is the same. And I would say that we need to value all types of open practice that are going on in our universities. And the reason why I dislike maturity models or engagement models that focus on things like ladders, rungs, or even pyramids is that essentially it says that by human nature, we want to be on the top rung of that ladder. We want to be at the top of that pyramid. It infers that there's a hierarchy and thus a value system. What I prefer instead is a continuum. We're all on a journey. That journey is equally valid, and it doesn't matter what you're engaging with. Now, one of the things you might like to look up after this is the continuum of open practice. And this, it's going to be updated fairly soon. But what this does is it suggests not only evidence of what people would be doing at these various stages of the continuum, but most importantly, what support is available for them. And I'm going to use this as a bit of a frame so that we can talk about some examples of practice so that you can see what is going on. Now, the support aspect is something that I'm going to really hammer, because one of the ways that I look at this is that a lot of our faculty staff get involved because they have a very different idea, or they have a challenge that open could assist. They want to get on with the learning and teaching. They want to get on with student engagement. And often it is the people who are well versed in open who are the ones doing a lot of the background work, who are supporting. And those support mechanisms are so important. The way that I look at it is, this is an image from Japanese kabuki theatre. And in this, you have these black-clad individuals who are known as kuroko. And a kuroko blends in with the background. They are responsible during the theatre for moving the scenery, for playing the bit parts, and in doing so, they let the main actors get on with acting. And so I think that there's a big role for the university to look at support roles, almost as shifting the landscape, supporting the change, and being these kuroko. So let's take a look at a couple of examples. Now, these that I'll start with are from USQ. This is from our Open Grants program. It's been running since 2015, and we've had a total of 54 staff come through this program. We're just about to do our call for 2021 and hoping to launch that on Monday. We have a few different activities that have occurred through this. So firstly, we had a GIS course in our engineering courses, where the lecturer decided that rather than going with a very expensive license-driven piece of software that was well and truly embedded within the faculty, they were going to go with a free and open source software, which is called QGIS. Now, not only did this provide more equitable access to the students, because previously any student that wanted to access the licensed version who was an online student needed to dial into one of the remote labs. They needed to book a time in there and share those labs and share those resources with every other student in the course. And so we had students who would sometimes be booking at 2 o'clock in the morning on a Sunday, because that was literally the only time they could get in there in order to work with that software and do their assessment. So by adopting the free and open source software and then building core learning and teaching resources that help students step their way through these types of activities and really put into practice the learning within that course, the lecturer was not only able to ensure that everyone had equitable access to the content and to the tools, but also saved students money. And this one was featured in 2017. He received an honourable mention in the ACODE Awards for innovation in technology and enhanced learning. Another one, if we talk about legacy content. So we had course examiners who had manuscripts that were almost ready to go, and that was for wellbeing in educational contexts. And so they came to us because they wanted that enhanced readership. They wanted to reduce the costs for students, but also get their research out in a way that could be interacted with by anybody in the world. Now, they've put this out. It's been internationally peer reviewed now. It has resulted in speaker invitations, research invitations, and then we're building another layer over the top of this. David Porter mentioned hypothesis as a social annotation tool. We're going to be doing some testing later on this year where students are going to be annotating the text so that we can get a revised version, and then students will be acknowledged as co-contributors or co-constructors of that knowledge. We also had another course, A Skills Online. This one supports students who identify as being on the autism spectrum. It was run on campus, face-to-face. Now, 70% of our students are online, will never set foot on campus. And so they took this program online, and the other brilliant thing was they engaged all of the mentors who were students who had gone through the program previously as a steering committee. And those students decided on things like representation, style of artwork, how things were communicated, what videos would be included. They were the reference group and steering committee for the successful implementation. And we've had 9 other universities adopt A Skills Online. And because it comes with all of the permissions, those other universities have been able to file off the serial numbers. They've been able to change it for local context, swap in, swap out content, and have been able to use it how they see fit. This one here, David mentioned H5P as well for interactivity. This is a book that we launched just in time for semester 1. Now, it's supplementary during 2021, but will become a core text for 4 of our courses. So we're going to have about 1,600 students a year interacting with this textbook. And this will replace a textbook that's about $198 at the moment. So you do the math, 198 times about 1,600. But the really exciting part is that within this, embedded in the textbook, there are self-assessment quizzes. So students can test their learning as they progress through and then reflect on the areas that they need to improve upon, and also just get that reassurance as well as to whether or not they are tracking. So this is a really exciting development, and now that we've started to show this to other lecturers, they're getting excited and they want to really explore things like H5P and also interactivity within the course content. The last one that I'm going to show you, and this is one that I'm going to leave you with today, is Gems and Nuggets. This was the result of early childhood educators in the community identifying a range of professional learning areas that they were unable to engage with due to time, cost, availability, a whole range of things, especially in terms of Indigenous education, reconciliation education, and multicultural education. What happened was they produced a list of what they really desperately needed in the workplace. Our students within that course then adopted one of the practitioners and designed professional learning material that met the needs of those practitioners, and then published this as an open text so that all of those practitioners, they didn't just get the resources that their student had adopted them for, but rather they got a whole book of resources. And volume 2 will be coming out in the next couple of months. This is now standard for this course, and this is renewable. This is stuff that students are getting really excited about. They are showing a huge level of positivity around their assessment work. And on top of that, our initial analysis of student achievement is showing very real rise in student achievement within this course. And the comments that are coming through from the course evaluation are marvelous. I would also say that, and I'll leave this with you, that there are beacons of practice out there. That if you are looking to either connect with other people, or if you are looking to build on the work of others, there is plenty going on. And so I've also provided a snapshot here, everything from our MIT's Open Textbook Heroes through to Nick Souza and Jessica Teal, who work in intellectual property law at QUT. They've created an open textbook in a wiki, and students add to that. One of their assessment pieces is they have to write an information article to go in that every semester. So what I would highly recommend is go out, look, See if there are things that you can bring back to your own institution. And I will leave you with the words of Professor Jeff Scott, who gave the group that I was a part of probably one of the best three-word slogans, which he says, listen, link, lead. A lot of what we do is we listen to academic staff. We say, what's going on? What's your challenge? Okay, and then once we've listened to them, we link to something in open ed that will have a real and meaningful change for them, and potentially will make their lives more exciting or easier. And then lead. So think about the listen, link, lead, and also that open is everyone's business.